I've been helping Canadians retire for the last 20 years, saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes, maximizing their income with targeted withdrawal strategies, and creating a clear, stress-free plan so all of our clients can achieve their retirement goals. And now, I want to help you do the same. I've taken my 2 decades worth of knowledge and I've put it all into this video. By the end, you'll learn key steps you need to take before retirement, how much you may need to retire, how to draw down your assets efficiently, common mistakes retirees make and how to avoid them, and perhaps the most important, how to mentally prepare for this big life change. Now, a successful retirement actually begins before you retire. So let's kick things off with the key steps you need to take in the few years leading up to retirement. The first thing you want to do is assess your current financial situation. Where are you at? How much debt you have? What are you saving? Where are your investments at? So many of you are not actually tracking and assessing on an annual basis or even more often what's going on in your financial world. Are you actually getting ahead? Are you moving closer to retirement from a financial standpoint? We have a net worth tracker as well as a budget form you can download from our website. We'll link those below if you need help with that. Again, you want to start tracking your budget, and it doesn't have to be a strict budget. You get later in life doing a budget, like no one wants to do that. But as you work through your net worth tracker, if it's not increasing on an annual basis, you might have to go back to the budget and get things aligned. So again, assess your current situation. Step 2 is to maximize your retirement savings. So once you understand where you're currently at, now we need to make sure we're maximizing for retirement. Now, a lot of you might think, well, that's maximizing my pension, my RRSP, like retirement savings tools. But maximizing for retirement doesn't necessarily mean all of your money is going into an RRSP. It could be a TFSA. It could be paying down debt. Again, the whole idea of saving for retirement is to put yourself in the best financial position for retirement. Yes, that probably means accumulating more funds in your retirement savings accounts, but it also means paying off debt, paying off your mortgage, or at least paying down your mortgage, saving money in a TFSA. If you retire without money in a TFSA, you have a lot less flexibility. So start saving up in a TFSA. You're not going to get the tax break now, but it might create that more flexibility in retirement, saving you tax later. So again, it's a balance between all of this stuff. And that's why I say it's really important to make sure you have a proper plan in place 5 to 10 years before retirement. So if there are adjustments that you need to make, you have a bit of a runway to make those adjustments. And for those of you that have a pension at work or maybe a matching RSP plan at work, make sure you're maximizing those. So many people we talk to are not maximizing free money from work. Like if your work matches you 3% of your pay and you're only putting in 1%, find a way to get to 3%. We all want to make more money, but then there's things like this we're not maximizing on. So make sure you're maximizing that work matching plan. Tip number 3 is to create a retirement budget. And it's a budget / wish list. And again, I know later in life budgets are no fun, but you want to have a general idea of how much am I going to spend? How do my finances change a little bit as I enter into retirement? You might be traveling more, so you're spending more in certain areas, but you're not commuting to the office and other expenses, so those are coming down. So again, work through this sheet. And one thing you want to add in there is many of you have bucket list items. And if you don't have a bucket list item, create that bucket list item. What are the costs to do those things? You need to be considering those in your plan. And that's why it's important to have that TFSA account. Because if you want to go on a very expensive trip or buy something very expensive and all your money's in registered accounts, it doesn't create a lot of flexibility and you're going to end up paying a lot more tax than you should be otherwise. So again, this is why everything needs to come together. I always say, if you look at retirement planning in individual silos, you're lining yourself up for disaster, both from an income standpoint and a tax standpoint. You need to look at everything holistically. And that's why it's really important to make sure you have that bucket list. What do I want to do down the road? So actions I take now on where and how I save my money will line me up better for retirement. Tip number 4 is to pay down your debt. Now I realize that real estate in Canada is through the roof. It's very expensive. I live in the greater Vancouver area and homes around me are $2 million for a basic family home, which is crazy. I don't know how these young people are getting into the market, but As you get closer to retirement, you may still be carrying a mortgage, and that's okay. When you build out your retirement plan, you can build in the cost of that mortgage in there, the payments. Just make sure you can afford the ongoing payments. Stress test it in case rates do go back up. Don't see it happening, but you never know. So stress test it. But when we talk about paying down debt, make sure if you do enter retirement with any debt, the only debt you have is your mortgage. If you have credit card debt, line of credit, anything else, car debt, pay that off before you retire. It's going to give a lot more cash flow flexibility for you, which you will need in retirement. Don't take a car loan 1 or 2 years before retirement and carry that into retirement. Not a great idea. Pay cash for vehicles. So as you get closer to retirement, you need to change your mindset around debt. Try and get rid of everything you have other than your mortgage. And if you can get rid of your mortgage, try and do that too. Tip number 5 is to evaluate your insurance needs. And this is probably not you need more insurance. It's time to get rid of your insurance. Now, leading up to retirement, until retirement, for most of you, you're earning income, you might have some debt to pay off, you're still in accumulation phase, especially those last 5 to 10 years before you retire. That's typically the sweet spot. We're able to save a lot more. Like a lot of your retirement savings happens in that last 5 to 10 years. So especially if you're married or common or someone's relying on you, then you need to make sure you still have your life insurance. Because if you pass away, you might have 2, 5, 10 years of a lot of savings that's just not happening anymore, and that's very costly for the other person potentially. But as you get closer to retirement, continue to assess with your financial planner if your insurance is still needed. We do a lot of retirement plans for people that have entered into retirement that are carrying a term life insurance policy. They're paying hundreds of dollars a month for, and we assess, and there's not a need for it anymore. If they pass away, there's enough money there for the other person to live the life they want in retirement. So again, insurance is very, very important as you lead up to retirement. For some of you, you still need it in retirement, but for a lot of you, you don't. Now, for some of you, as you get close to retirement, you have renewals coming up. Should I carry my insurance or not? For 99% of you, you still need to continue with your life insurance until you retire. And again, maybe even a little bit into retirement. Because there might be someone relying on that need, especially like disability insurance. What happens if 5 years before retirement, you're a single person and you become disabled? Who's taking care of you? How's that working? Again, run through these scenarios. We don't want to face it, but we need to plan for it. So again, talk to your financial planner to make sure that this is built into your retirement plan. Tip number 6 is to plan for healthcare. So this is very important in that a lot of you have healthcare coverage through work. They're going to pay a percentage of your premiums up to a certain amount. You're somewhat covered at work for most of you. When you retire, that coverage is gone. So how are you going to pay for it? And I'll say this, most of Canadians pay out of pocket for healthcare that is not covered through MSP or whatever province or territory you live in. There's some provincial or territory coverage. Above that, you're paying out of pocket. Now, again, your typical health and dental plan, you need to run the numbers. What we recommend for most people is to look at an individual plan. So you can go to, say, Manulife or Blue Cross and buy individual health and dental plan. What's the premium and what's the benefit to you? And then look at, on an average year, how much would I use? And are you getting value out of it? And a lot of times you may not be. So again, run that test for you. If you go to dentist and you do some medications and maybe massage and chiro or whatever it is, add all those expenses up and then pretend you ran them through. Again, a lot of those plans only cover you up to $25 or $50 per practitioner per visit. Only 80% for dental up to a certain amount. So run it through there, compare it to the premiums that you need to pay, and see if it makes sense. And again, a lot of these plans, as you get older, the premiums increase over time, but your benefit doesn't increase. So just be aware of all these things. So are you better paying out of pocket, or are you better having a plan? That's one thing you need to look at. The other thing is, as you plan for retirement, you need to ensure, what kind of medication, what is my typical cost? And making that in your budget as well. Again, that needs to be part of your retirement budget. The last part of it is healthcare, later in life, in-home care or a care facility. And again, the large majority of you watching this video will not need that, but we all know people that went to a care home. It was very expensive. So this is a conversation you want to have with your financial planner. Everyone has a different mindset and need for this. So again, Open up that conversation with your financial planner to figure out how can you plan forward both from now to retirement and then through retirement for your expected healthcare costs. The seventh thing you need to do, and this is really important, is to update your estate plan. Now, when we talk about estate plan, there's two parts of it. One part of it is what your lawyer or notary will do for you, which is create your will and power of attorney, kind of your legal document saying, when I pass away or if I become incapacitated, here's what happens or here's who gets the money. The other part of it is with your financial planner to figure out how do I create a retirement plan that if I pass away, there's the most amount of money possible after tax going to the people. So that's with your financial planner. That's what your financial planner should be doing for you. So when we say, look, we do estate planning, it's around your tax plan. So we're not doing the legal documents, we're doing the planning around, okay, you want to leave all your money to Sally, but let's make sure she's getting the most possible, but you're still enjoying retirement while you're alive. So when we talk about updating your estate plan, in this specific model, I'm talking about your will, your power of attorney, all of that. Many of you have not reviewed your will in 20, 30 years. It's outdated, it's changed. There's a lot of changes that happen. The other part that a lot of you are missing is your digital assets. We all have a digital life now, whether it's your login through Facebook, through YouTube, through social media, your bank login. Who has all that data? Where are you storing the passwords? It's really important if you pass away that your executor knows how to access these accounts. Again, there's kind of master password options out there, LastPass and many others, OnePass that you can use. You need one main password. Once you're logged in, you can see all your other passwords. That's one option. Some people write it down and save it somewhere. But again, you want to make sure your will, your power of attorney, and you have this digital life documented. Because if you don't have it documented, how is your executor going to get access to shut down your Facebook page, right? You don't want to get birthday wishes on your Facebook page 10 years after you're dead. Just a little awkward. So make sure your executor has that information or at least knows where to access that information when you pass away. Number 8 is to determine your retirement age. And a lot of you typically will have an age set in stone. So it might be 60, 65, somewhere in between typically. It might be 55, it might be 70. But a lot of us have it preset of, I am retiring at 65 because that's when my dad did, that's when my neighbor did, that's when my coworkers do. Or maybe that's when your pension goes to. There's many reasons why we pick certain ages. But I encourage you to sit down with your financial planner to actually map out a retirement plan. It amazes me how many times we'll do a plan for a client and we're like, yeah, you could have retired 3 years ago. Or maybe it's you're 10 years from retirement, but if you want to retire at 8 years, you could do that. So it opens up those conversations. It also goes the other way sometimes where they want to retire at 60 and it's like, you know what, you're going to have to go to 63 if you want to live the retirement you're hoping to live. So again, you may have a set date or age in your head, but make sure that your retirement plan actually lines up with that date. Again, you might be a bit before, a bit after. That's really important data to know. Most of us don't want to work longer than we have to. Some do, most don't. So make sure you understand when you can retire. Not when you want to retire, but when you can retire. Tip number 9 is to plan for post-retirement activities. So a lot of you are going to pick up new hobbies or continue with hobbies that you did earlier in life. I talked to someone the other day and they used to be really into music, guitars earlier in their 20s and 30s, and then life took over. And they've just retired at 60 and they're picking it back up and they actually are quite involved with it. So again, is this something you did in the past or is this a new hobby that you need to pick up? So again, that's where I talked earlier about listing what you want to do. What are your bucket list items? Some of those might be hobbies, travel, excursions, whatever it is. But if your goal is, I want to go, do a 2-day hike, but you've never hiked before, you may need to start training for that or planning for that or getting in shape for that. If it's musical instruments, what do you want to play? Should you start learning and dabbling in that now so that when you hit retirement, you have that base understanding? So figure out what you think you want to do in retirement. It may not be perfect, but start kind of planning around that. What do I want to do in retirement and what do I need to do leading up to retirement to put myself in the best situation so I can actually do them and enjoy them and take them fully? All right, let's dive into this a bit further. How do you know when you've saved enough to retire? I know it's a bit of an annoying answer, but it depends. Some of our clients need $500,000. Some need well over $1 million. It really comes down to your specific income needs in retirement. To give you a general idea of how much you may need, let's walk through 3 different scenarios using our financial planning software that would show you what you'd be able to spend in retirement if you had $500,000, $750,000, or even $1 million or more saved. Now, the amount you need to have saved has many variables to it, obviously, if you're married or single, which again, I'll cover both married and single people in this video to show you the difference. But your rate of return, how much CPP and OAS are you collecting? There's a lot of variables, as well as your age. Again, if you're retiring at 55 or 70, it's going to play a factor as well. And this is why it's really important to sit down with your financial planner and run your specific numbers. Like if you're at 500,000 and you work a bit more and save 750, how much of a difference does that make for your retirement income? So here we have John YouTube, who's saved RSP of 200,000, TFSA of 50,000, and Andrew has done the same thing. Again, with government benefits, we put them at 75% of max, and we've delayed it till age 70 just to keep it level across the board. So we've set that in every single situation. Now we can see here when we run a sustainability scenario for both of them, you'll see a combined income after tax and adjusted to inflation of $57,365. So here's scenario 1. Couple, age 60, looking to retire. They've saved up $500,000 and they're looking at a flatline income after tax adjusted to inflation of about $57,000. So what happens if this couple continued to work maybe till 65 and saved up a bit more? That's something that they would want to run with their planner. Or is 50,000 enough? Maybe we ladder it to 60, 55, 50, gives them enough. There's some stuff we can play with here, but their base number based on $500,000 would be $57,000 after tax and adjusted to inflation. Now here we have the same couple, but instead of 500, they've saved 750,000 by age 60. So 275,000 in the RSP each, 100,000 in the tax-free savings account. This is mapped out till age 95, but it shows that they will have $66,480. So that extra $250,000 gave them about $10,000 a year after tax. If we jump into a scenario where they were able to save $1 million, so double that original scenario, again, 400,000 RSP, 100,000 TFSA for both of them. When we look at the combined after-tax income, we're looking at a good number here, close to $75,000 after tax and adjusted to inflation. So looking at this comparison, again, on the left, you see the scenario number 1. You'll see the total income. This is in nominal dollars. And again, we'll scroll over to real dollars, maybe a little easier to look at. But real dollars is today's dollars. Like, what am I collecting in today's dollars adjusted to inflation? 500,000, again, just over 57,000. 750 on the right-hand side there, 66,480. And in the middle, we have $1 million saved, option 3, and we're just shy of $75,000. Their lifetime collected, you can see, is just over 2 million, 2.7, and 2.4. You can also see the breakdown of their total taxes. So yes, the person saved has a lot less income, but you can also see they pay a lot less tax at $83,000 versus when you have $1 million, you have over double the tax bill. Again, we're in a graduated tax rate here in Canada. So of course, as you have more income on the higher end, you're gonna have a higher tax bill. It's not double the tax, not double the income. In this scenario, we're running their savings to zero. So the state after tax is going to be the same, but this might be something you look at in different scenarios with your planner to say, like, what puts me in the best position after tax for my estate as long as I'm meeting my income needs. So these are things we really want to look at when we're planning with clients. But in this case scenario, you can see the difference between $500,000 and $1 million is just under $20,000 of income a year. You're over double the tax bill. So again, there's a lot of moving parts here. So is it worth saving $1 million versus 500? Yeah, of course you have more income, but do you need that income? And I think this is where a lot of people struggle. Like, they have a number in their head. We did a video a long time ago about you need 1.7 million. That was about a lot of research and articles out there that to retire in Canada, you need 1.7 million. Well, it really depends on what is your need. How much money do you actually need to live off of? Here, if you had $1 million, age 60, decent CPP, 75%, which is, I would say, below average for a working couple, it's not a bad income. Could you not live off $75,000 a year after tax adjusted to inflation? Most retirees could. We deal with retirees day in, day out. So do you need 1.7? Do you even need $1 million? Could you live off $60,000 a year if we, bump that up with laddered income? Maybe. So maybe you only need $500,000. Maybe you can retire earlier. And again, this is a conversation you need to have with yourself, your spouse or common law if you're married. You need to figure out, like, what is the best way forward? We have $500,000, we're 60. Are we happy with 60 grand a year? If we are, maybe it's time to retire. Let's enjoy those 5 years instead of working them. Yes, we'd have more money, but we're losing 5 years of the go-go phase of retirement. So these are all these decisions you have to make, and why it's important as you get closer to retirement, you start looking at the hard numbers to figure out, like, are we on track? What can we do different? How can we put ourselves in a better position? And I think a lot of you miss this. One of the main questions I get constantly is, Adam, when is the best time to get a retirement plan done? And I'll always say 5 to 10 years from retirement. Yes, things will change over time. You will have to get it updated most likely, but you have a runway. You can set yourself up for better success, maybe more money in retirement, maybe an earlier retirement. You can make adjustments you need to make to put yourself in the best position for when you retire. Yes, rate of return, inflation, your job, there's so many factors that go into it. And I see comments all the time and it drives me crazy where it's, you know what, I'm never getting a retirement plan because there's too many variables. It just changes all the time. It's true, it could change all the time. I would say a lot of plans we do stay pretty steady. But yes, of course there's variables that have to be put in, assumptions, all of that. But wouldn't you rather be moving in the right direction? And if you need to detour, you make the detour at that time? I sure would. Maybe some of you don't. Maybe you just like to just wing it, pay more money to CRA. Hey, that's great. More money CRA has, the more they can burn. So thank you for that. But for those of us that want to pay less tax, want to put more money back in our pocket, want to retire earlier, want to retire with more money, it's still better to get a plan. And again, things change down the road, either seen or unseen, then you can make those adjustments at that time. Next, I want to show you what it looks like to be a single with those same retirement savings, $500, $750, and $1 million at age 60. And the difference it is, again, you may need less because you're single, but definitely not having that second CPP and old age security and some income splitting definitely hurts on the income side. So as we look at the comparison here, you can see with $500,000 saved, they're looking at about $37,000 after tax adjusted to inflation. $45,000 with $750, and on the far right, $1 million saved is about $53,000. So substantially less. It's about $20,000 less per category. So again, the $500,000 saved, 37, whereas for a couple it was 57. So quite drastic. And although as a single you might need only about 70%, you have to run these numbers because you may need to work a bit longer, save a bit more because of that income splitting, CPP and OAS that you're not having. So again, for the same retiree lifestyle at age 60, instead of 500, you might need about $600,000 to $700,000 to kind of meet that gap. So again, couple versus single, it can change, but the difference between 500 to $1 million, a lot of people say, oh, it's double the income. But even for a single person, it goes from 37,000 to 53,000 because a lot of our income derives from the Canadian pension plan and old age security. So keep that in mind. Saving double doesn't mean double the income. In fact, it doesn't at all. So that's why it's important to understand, like, what is your number? We all have a different number. My number is different than yours, different than your neighbor. And so that's why when people say, you need $1 million to retire. Do you? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you need $2 million, maybe you only need about $400,000. Everyone's lifestyle is different, your needs are different, your current situation is very different. Now that you have a general idea of how much money you need to save to retire, we need to take a closer look at one of the most important parts of your retirement plan, your RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. For most of you watching this video, your RRSP probably will be your main income source when it comes to retirement. So let's first discuss what happens to your RRSP when you retire, and then I'll give you a withdrawal strategy that will likely save you thousands in taxes throughout your retirement. So why a RRSP is so popular is as you put money into it while you're working, it creates a tax deduction. So as an example, let's say you make $60,000 a year and you put $5,000 into your RRSP. CRA looks at it as if you've made $55,000. So you take your $60,000, your gross income, minus whatever you put into your RRSP, and that's the net result for income that you have to pay tax on. So that's where it's beneficial. So ideally, as you're working and making more money, you're going to put money in at a higher tax rate. The idea is it grows tax deferred, so that's one of the side benefits of an RRSP. As you put money in there, as it grows investment over time, you're not taxed on it every single year. You're taxed on it later when you pull it out in retirement, which again, hopefully are in a lower tax bracket in retirement, creating a lot of efficiency. You've gotten the tax break at a high tax bracket, it's grown tax deferred, and you pull it at a lower tax bracket. And that's the way it works for 99% of you. Again, There's going to be the odd person that's actually in a higher tax bracket in retirement, but that's not very common. Now, when you hit retirement, your RRSP needs to be converted to a RRIF, a retirement income fund. Now, they're the same thing essentially. You have an RRSP, it builds up over time. When you hit retirement, all you're really doing is changing the name of the account. So if you think, well, I don't want to sell all my investments in an RRSP to move it to a RRIF, a RRIF. The reality is you don't need to sell anything. All you're doing is setting up a RRIF account. So let's say your money is sitting at, a financial institution, it's under an RRSP. All you have to do is set up a RRIF account, an RRIF account, and everything can just move over as it is. So think of it as an umbrella, right? RRSP is an umbrella, your investments are under there, you set up a RRIF, and you just move the investments under that umbrella. There's no tax consequence to doing it, there's no fees to doing it, it's very simple. So that's the transition as you hit retirement. Now, you can convert your RRSP to a RRIF at any age. There's no rule around that, except for you need to do it by the year you turn 71. So the year you turn 71, you will be forced to convert your RRSP into a RRIF. You need to start drawing it out in the year you turn 72. So year you turn 71, convert it to a RRIF. Year you turn 72, start drawing it out. Now, for most of you, if you want to create some tax efficiency and proper drawdown in retirement, you're going to convert your RRSP to a RRIF much before age 71. Typically, when you retire, you want to convert to a RRIF and start drawing that money out. Now, a couple key points here. First off, you don't have to convert all of your RRSP to a RRIF as long as you're younger than age 71. So for some people, and again, situational here, but you may have, say, $200,000 in a RRIF, but you only want to take $5,000 or $10,000 out. You could set up a RRIF and just transfer that $10,000 to a RRIF and then take it out. Now, why would you do that? Why not just take it out of an RRSP? Well, typically, an RRSP, there's going to be a fee to pull money out. So if you take $10,000 out, there might be a $25 or $50 fee to do that. Also, when you look at the benefits of a RRIF over an RRSP, RRIF income is retirement income, meaning that you can actually income split it. So if you have a spouse or a common law partner, you can take RRIF income and income split. It's a pensionable income as long as you're 65 or older. So once you hit 65, it is worth it to convert your RRSP to RRIF and start drawing it out from that point because you could income split it. Money drawn out of a RRIF, there's not going to be that $25 or $50 fee. So that's another benefit over the RRSP. So as you start drawing money out of your RRSP, convert it to a RRIF, whether it's the whole thing or partially. I would say typically for most of you watching this video, convert the whole thing over to a RRIF. That's what's going to make the most sense. But again, talk to your financial planner to make sure you know what's best for you. Once you've converted your RRSP to RRIF and you start drawing it out for retirement income, there is a minimum amount you need to take out every single year. So that is one requirement. And that's why you may, if you have a really large, we've had some clients come in with $2 or $3 million RRSP, it's a great problem to have. But if we convert it to a RRIF, they weren't planning to pull the RRIF minimum out that year. They had some other income. So that would be one of the reasons you may not want to convert the whole amount. But again, for the majority of you, convert your RRSP to a RRIF, start drawing it out. Now, every age, there's a different minimum. So at age 65, the minimum is 4%, meaning that you need to take out at least 4% of the account value at the end of last year. So let's say December 31st, the account was worth $200,000 and you're 65 years old, you need to take out $8,000 as a minimum amount. You can take out up to $200,000. There's no maximum amount on a RRIF account, but there is that minimum. So just keep that in mind. And even the minimum amount is taxable income. Anything you pull out of a RRIF account is going to be taxable income. But again, if you create a good retirement drawdown account, tax plan, all of that, typically you're going to be taking out more than the minimum amount out of your RRIF. If you're someone that's just taking the minimum out every single year, you're probably going to hit a bit of a tax issue later in life. And you haven't done very good tax planning. So again, if you're sitting there saying, I've been retired for a few years and I'm just taking out the minimum, stop. It's time to review and actually build a proper retirement plan because you don't have one. So just be aware of that minimum amount that you need to be taking that out. Now you can take that out monthly. You can take it out in a one lump sum at the beginning, end, or middle of the year. It's very customizable, but as long as you meet that requirement for the calendar year, you are fine. Now, when it comes to withdrawing your RRIF account, again, there's that minimum amount that you need to take. One thing you need to be aware of is there's no withholding tax on that minimum amount. So again, let's go back to our last example. You have a $200,000 RRIF, you're 65, and you need to take out $8,000. If you only take out $8,000 that year, there won't be any withholding tax, meaning that you're going to get the full $8,000, which sounds great, but have you had tax withheld elsewhere? And what happens is you pull out your $8,000, tax time comes, you've had other incomes along the way, and you owe a little bit of tax. So just be aware of how that tax works. So the minimum amount on your RRIF, there's no withholding tax. Above the minimum amount, there's going to be a withholding tax based on the scale. So across Canada, Quebec's a little bit different. We'll link that below. But for most of Canadians, it's going to be from $0 to $5,000. Above the minimum will be a 10% withholding tax. From $5,000 to $15,000 is 20%, and above $15,000 is 30%. So again, just be aware of that. Again, talk to whoever's managing your money or wherever your money is managed to see, look, if I take out $20,000 versus the $8,000, how much withholding tax will there be? And then look at your plan and make sure that you're on track. Again, you want to make sure that your planning lines up with your income draw, that lines up with your withholding tax. There's moving parts here. So that when tax time comes, you know that, I'm going to owe $500 or $1,000, or I'm going to get a bit of a refund. You know what's going on. Again, I never have an issue with owing tax money as long as I know it and I've done tax planning along the way. But you don't want to get sideswiped in retirement with a large tax bill you were not expecting when you could have prevented it, right? Again, there's one thing. Layer one is make sure you do really good tax planning. And then layer two is, okay, you may have to pay a little bit of tax or get a tax refund. And I'll say this, because this is a video around RRSP to RRIF, so for a lot of you, this conversation means we're early in retirement. For the first few years of retirement, tax planning, like withholding taxes and all that, a lot of times is very rigid. So it takes a few years to get used to. Like there might be more withholding tax by default and you can't control it than the amount of tax you actually have to pay. So you're going to get a tax refund that you can then use for the next year, maybe top up TFSA, whatever it is. So again, first few years of tax planning and money movement around taxes can be quite confusing. So don't get too thrown off on it. Again, make sure you have a good plan, make sure you understand it, make sure you have a good team around you working with you on this. But there are some moving parts. Again, withholding tax, it's CRA mandated. You can't always control that. So maybe they're withholding too much tax and you're going to get a big tax refund. It is what it is. Why do I recommend that you should withdraw more than your RRIF minimum in retirement? This is where the RRSP meltdown strategy comes into play. The RRSP meltdown is all about aggressively drawing down your RRIF early in retirement, even if it's more than you actually need. This strategy routinely puts hundreds of thousands of dollars back into our clients' pockets. So let's get back into the software so I can show you why the RRSP meltdown is so effective. So the first reason an RRSP meltdown makes sense, and again, an RRSP meltdown is when you draw out more RRSP or RRIF money than you actually need to take out. So your RRSP, when you retire, you want to convert it to a RRIF, a retirement income fund, meaning that it's now an income pool, something you're going to draw income out of. Now, every year there's a minimum amount you need to take out. Now, why would you want to kind of draw more than the minimum amount? And that's really what we're touching on in this video. But the first reason is maybe you have low or no income. As you know, in most provinces and territories here in Canada, the first $15,000 of income is tax-free. Now that varies depending what province or territory you're in, but around $15,000 is going to be tax-free to you if you pull it out of the RRSP, if you have no other income. Again, if you have $5,000 of income, that gives you $10,000 more. So there's a potential to pull money out of your RRSP or out of your RRIF on an absolutely tax-free basis. Now, this often happens, let's say with a couple, and I'll give an individual scenario here in a second, but let's say you have a couple and one spouse retires and one keeps working. And the working spouse makes enough to pay all the bills. So the non-working spouse just doesn't do anything, doesn't earn any income, but also doesn't draw any income out of their accounts. That can be a big tax mistake. Typically, that spouse or partner wants to be drawing some money out, have some taxable income, and start drawing down and melting down their registered account. So again, that needs to be part of your plan. And if it's not, or maybe you're coming up to that scenario of, yeah, I am retiring, but my spouse is going to be working, I don't need any income. But does it make sense to draw that income? It probably does. So make sure you run that with your financial planner. That can save you thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in taxes and strategy, more income down the road. So make sure you do it right from day one. The second reason to do the RRSP meltdown is to allow you to delay your CPP and possibly your old age security. Now, a lot of you, and this is probably the biggest pushback I get, is, Adam, I want to take my CPP as early as possible. And I'll get to that here in a second. But if you're someone that wants to delay your CPP, possibly delay your old age security, then drawing down your RRSP makes a lot of sense. And in my mind, it almost works in reverse. We want to draw down the RRSP or the RRIF account. Thus, it makes sense to delay your CPP and OAS. So you can think of it either way. For me, I definitely think I want to draw down my registered accounts, which allow me to delay my CPP, which allows me to delay possibly my old age security, and it puts me in a better tax situation. So let's take a look at that in the software. So you can see in the software here right now, we have currently the CPP coming out at age 65 and the minimum amount coming out of your RRIF account. So you can see the first year is $23,077. And so this is just an individual person. I've put in here RRSP, TFSA, and non-registered accounts. But you can see just the minimum amount coming out, CPP taking at 65. Now, if we delay the CPP till 70, you can see there's no CPP till 70. OAS have left at 65, not as big of a benefit, but we could look at delaying that as well. And you can see I've overridden the RRIF withdrawal to $55,000, so much more RRIF coming out than was before. Now, I'm going to get into the fine details of why this matters and all the numbers here in a second, but this is really the strategy. It allows you to draw out the money earlier, and you can see by the time this client is 85, there's nothing left in the RRSP. So we've been able to wipe it out, which gives them a much better tax situation for estate planning. And I'll cover off all these details here in a second because some of the other tips, they all come together to make a more efficient plan for you. Maximizing your RRSP meltdown allows you to delay your CPP. Now, the benefit of delaying CPP is you're going to get more for longer. And a lot of you are worried about later in life, care, make sure you have enough money. Well, the Canadian pension plan is a guaranteed pensionable income, adjust to inflation. It's your bread and butter. We all want a defined benefit pension plan. And essentially your Canadian pension plan is that, but many of you take your CPP in your early 60s. The average is age 62. And you miss out on that really nice pension that we all crave. It's there for you, and doing the RRSP meltdown allows you to possibly take advantage of that. The third thing the RRSP meltdown allows you to do is to focus on the average tax rate versus the marginal tax rate. So as you lead up to retirement, it's important to focus on the marginal tax rate. And your marginal tax rate is how much tax do I pay on the next dollar that I earn? And when you're making money, that matters. So if I earn a little bit more, how much tax am I paying? In retirement, you want to look at your marginal tax rate, but what actually works out better when you're looking at overall taxes and strategy is your average tax rate or your effective tax rate. So when we look at our average tax rate in retirement, we want to level that out. And by applying the RRSP meltdown, it allows you to level out your average tax rate much better. And I'll show you that here in a second. But that average tax rate, leveling it out, will allow you to pay less tax through retirement. And typically the RRSP meltdown, like I showed you earlier, gives you a better tax at death. So we're paying less tax while we're alive and less tax at death. And we have more money in our pocket, which I'll show you here in a second. The fourth benefit you get with RRSP meltdown is you get to balance out your registered and non-registered, or your taxable and non-taxable income sources. So again, let's jump into this client and take a look at it. So you can see here with this client that when we don't apply the RRSP meltdown, we're just taking out the minimum RRIF account every single year. You can see that the first 3 to 4 years, a lot of that extra money is coming out of the non-registered account. Now, to follow that, once the non-registered account is wiped out, they're pulling out the TFSA account. The big problem with this, and this client had a fair amount of money in their TFSA and non-registered account, $100,000 in non-reg, $120,000 in TFSA. But by the time they're 75, so 10 years into retirement, they're completely out of accounts other than their RRIF account. And that leaves a very bad tax situation. So the only income that they can draw from is the RRIF. And you can see at age 75, because they have an income need of $60,000 a year, they're required to pull $81,000 out. And this is where I was just talking about marginal and effective or average tax rates. You can see their effective tax rate is around 10-11%. At 74, it jumps up to 14, and then it jumps to 19% at age 75. So again, you get this big swinging range for taxes, and you end up paying more. And so when we look at your overall tax rate, I can see here with no RRSP meltdown, the total tax payable from age 65 to 90 is $295,000. You can also see here on the right-hand side, tax on estate, at age 85, they still have a fair amount of tax left, $99,000, so close to $100,000 in tax. So you've paid $295,000 through your lifetime, but if you die at say 85, there's still $100,000 of taxes due. Now let's look at the taxable versus non-taxable or registered or non-registered accounts when doing the RRSP meltdown. You can see here, we've applied the RRSP meltdown, we've delayed that CPP because that's a huge benefit to doing that. Now you can see the non-registered account, we don't have to deplete it quite as quickly. Instead of 3 years, we're doing it over just over 6 years. And then from there, we're touching on the TFSA account. But you can see that TFSA account is there all the way to death. So that TFSA account never runs out, which gives you a lot of flexibility. If you need money, if you have an emergency, that's going to be there for you. Now, if we look at the total taxes, you can see, again, I want to go that effective or the average tax rate. It floats between about 13.5%, 14% to 16%. So it's within that 2 to 3% range that we like to see. So much better there. Now, total taxes, again, we're at $295,000. Now we're at $270,000. So this client, through their lifetime, has saved $25,000 in tax. Now I'll get to additional income here in a second as well. So there's not just a tax savings, but they actually have more money in their pocket after tax as well. And again, if we scroll down to age 85, you can see there's $0 on their estate. So if they were to pass away, there's nothing owed. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but Adam, if I draw down my RRSP early and delay my CPP, and I end up dying, say, early at 75, my estate is going to get less. I've worked hard to save this money. I want to use the government's money. Well, let's take a look at that. So I'm going to grab estate at age 75. So I'm going to click on here. Now this is going to show a few. I want to look at the top left one here. And you can see the estate after tax in real dollars. So today's dollars, if you apply the RRSP meltdown and delay your CPP to 70, this client, again, dies at 75. So this is only collecting CPP for 5 years versus 10 years. You can see after tax in the estate's pocket or the beneficiary's pocket is $256,000. The box just to the right of that, you can see is $239,000. So that's not doing the RRSP meltdown and taking your CPP at 65. So you've paid less tax, you have more income, again, I'll show you that here in a second, and your estate, even if you die early at 75, your estate has more money after tax to spend. So isn't that unique? And we see this again and again when we build plans. A lot of people think, if I delay my CPP and then I die early, because of drawing down my accounts, it's actually left for my beneficiaries and charities and loved ones. Well, that's not always the case. In fact, that's typically not the case. And again, I picked random numbers, I threw this together. I didn't know how it would turn out, but I know that it typically does turn out this way. The fifth and final benefit of your RRSP meltdown is, as I showed you, that TFSA account was able to draw out for longer. And the reality is when you do the RRSP meltdown, you might end up pulling more money out of your RRIF account than you actually need. So it's more of a tax play than an income need play. So you can see in this scenario where we've done the RRSP meltdown and they have that CPP delayed till 70, you can see the TFSA account. So we're taking money out of there for about 5 years, but then there's a couple years and it's a very small amount, $973 and then $205. But the reality is they don't need all the money they're pulling out. They're pulling it for tax planning purposes. They end up topping up the TFSA and then pulling it out later, but it gives that flexibility. If they have an emergency, that TFSA account is there. Now, the last thing I want to show you is the overall picture of this scenario. So again, client has money in an RRSP, a TFSA, a non-registered account. We're looking at what happens if they take CPP at 65 and just take the minimum amount. And why I use that example, because that's most of you that are watching this video. Most of you take the minimum amount, you have no tax planning, you take your CPP right away. It's not a good strategy. And, this is probably a very simple scenario here, but you can see even in basic scenarios, there's huge benefits to it. So let's look at each scenario individually, and I'm going to pick out a few points that really make a big difference, again, as part of the overall strategy, but mainly that RRSP meltdown opportunity that you have. So when we're looking at this plan, basically what we've set out here is we've created a laddered income. So the client said, look, I need $60,000 a year after tax adjusted to inflation for my go-go phase. Then it can scale down to $55,000. And then once I turn 86 for the last 5 years, it can be $48,000. They've also asked for an additional travel expense during their go-go phase. So they've asked for $10,000 adjusted to inflation for that first 10 years of retirement. So you can see that there as well. So there's their income need, $60,000, plus an additional travel need. So we've built all that in there. Again, CPP and OAS starting at 65. We're just taking the minimum amount out and then complementing it with non-registered and then TFSA. So as we see, if we scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to collapse this and we can see our total. So all types of assets. If we scroll to the bottom, at age 90, they've been able to hit their income need requirement. So that's great. And there's about $19,000 left in their accounts. And that's all sitting in an RSP still, so it would be taxable. And you can see the tax on the state on the far right side. There's a taxable event on death at any point up to age 90. Even beyond 90, if they kept living, they'd still have a bit of that RRIF account left. So they've met their need. They have enough to get what they want to do, but there's also not a great tax situation. Again, we showed earlier, they're paying $295,000 in taxes. And one of my biggest concerns with this is the estate. So if they do die a bit early, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax left on the estate. The other thing though is the flexibility. So if we look at the types of accounts here again, you can see that the non-registered account is gone within 4 years, and then the TFSA is gone by the end of the go-go phase. Well, what happens if this client at age 78 requires a new roof, a new furnace, a new car, has an emergency health bill, and needs $5,000, $10,000, $15,000? That's going to have to come out of their RRIF account, and you can see there's no other money other than their RRIF account. So it's going to drive up their taxable income. So they're in a 15% tax bracket. So they're going to lose a lot of that money to the taxman. And that's where I say when you build out your plan, you need to make sure you have tax optimization, income optimization, but flexibility as well. And a lot of you bypass that. What happens later if something happens to me? Do I have the flexibility in my plan to be able to conquer that? And again, that RSP meltdown, 99% of the time gives you that flexibility, especially if you don't have a lot of assets, right? You want to kind of manage stuff in a way that you're not kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you have something down the road. We know things happen. You want to protect against that. Now, when we look at the RSP meltdown, again, we've delayed CPP till 70, OAS we've left at 65. We've left the income the same, so 60,000, 55, and then 48 in the no-go phase. That travel expense is still there. Now, if we look at the total assets again, you can see at the end of life, age 90, instead of 19,000, there's $79,000. But not just that. That $79,000 is sitting in the tax-free savings account. So it's tax-free. You can see that their estate has no taxes from age 85 onward. And even before that, it's very minimal. So we've been able to draw down the estate tax for this client. And again, the total tax bill was $270,000 versus $295,000. Now, if this client had an emergency at age 78 again, well, guess what? At age 78, there's about $165,000 sitting in their TFSA account. That gives them the flexibility that they need. So now that we know the RSP meltdown helps keep your TFSAs funded for longer, let's look into this further. Why is it so important to have a well-funded TFSA in retirement? It's all about flexibility. Let's walk through two scenarios, one where a client does not have a TFSA in retirement, and the other one where they do, so you can see just how much of a difference it can make. When it comes to retirement planning, most of us focus on one of two accounts, the RSP or the TFSA, and depending on what your income is, the RSP may make more sense. And for most of us, we put all of our eggs in one basket, not focusing on the tax-free savings account. One of the problems we see if you don't have a funded TFSA in retirement is that the majority, if not all of your income is going to be taxable. And that's the purpose of this video, is to show you Don't put all your eggs in the one basket, because the tax-free savings account is a hugely important account as you enter into retirement. It gives you flexibility around taxable income and non-taxable income. And I get it. If you're ramping up for retirement and you're in your best earning years, you want to take advantage of the RRSP for the tax breaks, and you definitely still want to focus on the RRSP. Just don't forget about the tax-free savings account and the benefits that it has down the road for you. And that's where the ebbs and flows of a plan have to work on benefits pre-retirement and post-retirement. So let's jump into the scenarios and see what they look like. So here we have Mr. YouTube. He's built up an RRSP of $560,000, and we put his government benefits both starting at 65, and we put his CPP, his Canadian pension plan, at 75% and 100% for his old age security. He's been in Canada his whole life. So as we look at the plan itself, I want to look at a few things. A, flexibility, and B, total income. So in this case, Mr. YouTube is 65 years old. We've mapped this out to age 90. And you can see we've just let his CPP, old age security, and his RRIF account just naturally draw out to get to zero by the time he turns age 90. And you can see the real income, $44,474. So if Mr. YouTube didn't build up a TFSA, this is what his income would be like in retirement. Now, for many of you, this might look great. You might think, hey, if I could generate $45,000 a year after tax adjusted to inflation, that's not a bad retirement. We could ladder that, maybe get it up to closer to 50 in the go-go years, and have a pretty good retirement. The problem is, in this plan with no TFSA, is there's no flexibility. So if we jump back into this plan and say, well, what happens if Mr. YouTube needed to buy a new vehicle for $20,000 in 5 years, or put a new roof on? So currently, if we look at Mr. YouTube's taxable income, it's very level, and his total tax bill is also very level through retirement because everything's coming in pretty evenly. Now again, there's very little flexibility. So if he had that one-time expense of say $20,000 at age 70, how does that affect his plan? So you can see here we've put in an additional expense of $20,000 at age 70, and you can see in his total tax has gone from just under $6,000 a year up to close to $15,000 that year. And he's pulling much more, $61,408, out of his RRIF account. And the reason for that is because he had this one-time expense and he doesn't have any other resource to pull from other than his RRIF, which is going to drive up his taxable income, which is going to create a lot more tax for him. In this case, almost $10,000. Again, we can see his marginal tax rate is 28%. So $20,000 coming out, he's going to pay about $6,000 or $7,000 more in tax. Again, he's lost some credits and other things along there, meaning that his tax bill is a lot more money than he needs it to be. Now we might think, okay, well, at least he can manage this $20,000. How does that affect his overall income? And if I go to sustainability spending, we can see that it drops down to $43,635, or about $840 less every single year, adjusted to inflation through retirement. So it's quite substantial on what this has for an impact for its overall income through retirement. Now, what happened if Mr. YouTube built up just a bit of a TFSA? Instead of focusing 100% on his RRSP over the years, he started to chip away at a TFSA and built up a bit of a nest egg at 65. So in this scenario, I've assumed he's built up a $50,000 TFSA account and a $500,000 RRSP. Now, in the last scenario, we had the RRSP at 560, so total assets at 560. Now we have it at 550. And I did the difference because if they put money into an RRSP, they're getting a bit of a tax break and more money to invest. So I've tried to adjust it slightly around 20% to allow for that difference. So there's a bit less assets to begin with, but that's because some has gone into the tax-free savings account. So we can see here $500,000 in the RRSP, $50,000 in the TFSA account. Now, if we go back to a sustainability, how much income could Mr. YouTube generate? It's slightly more, $44,666. Now, this is only a couple $100 more per year. It's not substantial, but it is a little bit more. But what I want to look at here is he's still taking CPP at 65, old age security at 65, and he's drawing out of his RRSP and TFSA in a way that we typically see Canadians do, which is some RRSP, typically near the minimum, and then top it up with the TFSA. The problem with this is, although he's built a $50,000 TFSA account, you can see by the time he's 73, he's wiped that account out. So what happens at 75, 80? when he has that large expense again, guess what? He's going to have to pull from his RRSP. And you might say, Adam, well, let's draw this down slower, which means we're going to have to take more out of the RRIF account, which many of you are hesitant to do, and I get it. And I'll show you that here in a second and how that works and why that works. Now, again, in the first 7 to 10 years of retirement, Mr. YouTube is in a much better position here. He has TFSA money, he's paying less tax overall, he's got a bit more income. There's flexibility in that 10 years. So the TFSA account has helped Mr. YouTube here, but I think he needs to extend it a little bit further. So how do we do that, and how do we structure that in the best way possible? So by creating a bit of an RRSP meltdown here, you can see instead of letting the program kind of generate, about $15,000, $20,000, $22,000 out every year, we're going to force a bit more money out. So $3,000 gross every month, $36,000 a year. And you can see the TFSA account is drawn down much slower. In fact, for the first 10 years, there's some money going into the account. Now, we could create a bit of a laddered income strategy here and offset that and create some proper strategy here. I just want to focus on the TFSA because, again, it is the most powerful tool you need to have as you enter retirement. You can see in this case that the TFSA account is well funded right through retirement. In fact, it hits over $100,000 into their 70s. And so if they have that one-time expense, a medical emergency, whatever it is, they have that money that they can draw on from a tax-free basis. So if we look at that same example where we have a $20,000 expense at age 70, you can see Mr. YouTube's total tax bill has not gone up at all. His taxable income has not gone up at all. All we've done is depleted the TFSA account a little bit more than we would have otherwise, $17,597 in this case. But again, he still has a great TFSA account through the rest of retirement, creating and giving him that flexibility. So a few tips as you ramp up for retirement, or if you're already in retirement, how to utilize your TFSA account. Use it as a lever account. And what I mean by a lever account is if you need a little bit more money, pull it from there. If you don't, put it back into there. Just like Mr. YouTube, in the first 7, 8 years of retirement, he was pulling money out of his RRIF more than he actually was spending. Thus, he was allocating or contributing a little bit into his tax-free savings account, which gave it a bigger amount as he got later in life into his 70s and 80s, again, creating that flexibility. So what you want to do is you want to create tax planning around the RRIF account. What's the most optimal amount? Combine that again. You have to look at these all combined together. CPP, old age security, RRIF account, any type of taxable income needs to be looked at together. And then if you need a bit more money, pull from a non-reg, or in this case, a tax-free savings account. If you've maxed out your tax-free savings account, again, look to a non-registered account as well. But your tax-free savings account is going to give you the most flexibility and most tax-efficient income as you walk through retirement. The last scenario I want to show you here is the same thing. So again, RRSP meltdown here, TFSA, but I've delayed CPP or QPP for some of you all the way till age 70. And you can see the income jumped substantially from about $44,500 up to $45,900. So close to $1,500 more every year adjusted to inflation after tax. Again, you can create that flexibility, but you'll see that TFSA account is intact through retirement, giving you that flexibility. So lots of layers in tax planning here, but around the TFSA, it's super important that you start funding that if you haven't already in the 5 to 10 years leading up to retirement. Make sure you have a bit of a nest egg. Now, ideally you have about $30,000 or more in your TFSA account. I know that's going to be a challenge for many of you as you build up for retirement. Again, do all you can to start building that tool up. Again, that's an investment that grows tax-free, and you can pull that money out tax-free in retirement as you need it. Before we move on from TFSAs, let's take a moment to go over the few key basics about the account. Since this is an account you'll likely be withdrawing from and contributing to throughout your retirement, it's crucial to fully understand how it works to avoid any costly mistakes. The first thing we need to know is what actually is a TFSA and how does it work? The TFSA, tax-free savings account, is a tax advantage account. Any money that you put in, the growth of it, and when you pull it out is all 100% tax-free, which makes this account such a powerful tool. Now, one of the key things you need to understand with the tax-free savings account is that it's not really set up as a savings account, even though it has that in the name. It should be a tax-free investing account. And so what is it? It's an account where you can invest money, grow your money, and pull it out absolutely tax-free. And so again, I'll cover more of this here as we go forward in the other 9 points, but it's a really important account. And if you don't already have one open, Make sure you get it open as soon as possible and start using it to your advantage. Are TFSA contributions tax deductible? No, contributions made to your tax-free savings account are made with after-tax dollars and are not tax deductible. So when you make a deposit to your RRSP, your Registered Retirement Savings Plan, you get the tax deduction. But again, you're taxed on money when you pull it out. The tax-free savings account, you do not get the tax deduction. It is after-tax money, but again, a gross tax-free and is pulled out tax-free. So the accounts work differently, but again, that's where it's a powerful tool, is that you can utilize it for planning purposes down the road when you need that tax-free income. What is the annual TFSA contribution limit? The annual limit varies and it increases with inflation over time. For 2025, your annual contribution is $7,000. Now, the TFSA was introduced back in 2009. Back in 2009, if you were 18 years or older, you would have had maximum contribution since that point, as long as you were in Canada. That total lifetime contribution limit is $102,000. So if you were living in Canada in 2009, have never made a contribution to your tax-free savings account, and were at least 18 years old back in 2009, you could contribute up to $102,000 to your tax-free savings account as of 2025. In 2026, there'll be a new contribution room limit, which we'll introduce in the future here. But for 2025, the current new contribution limit is an additional $7,000. If you're not sure what your contribution limit is, maybe you've put money in, money out of your TFSA over time, and it's a little fuzzy, log into your CRA account and it will show you what your limit is. Now, again, if you log into day one, caveat here is that it will not include, until you do your taxes for 2024, any contributions or withdrawals from 2024. How is a TFSA contribution room calculated? So as previously mentioned, the contribution room is based on any unused contribution room from previous years plus this year's room. Now, where it gets complicated is if you've withdrawn money from your TFSA. So let's use the example of 2024. You had that contribution room of $10,000 that you could put in. Some from 2024, some unused from previous years, but your total contribution limit was $10,000. Let's assume you put in $10,000, but you also later in the year pulled out $20,000. So you've maximized your TFSA in 2024, but you made a withdrawal of $20,000. Come January 1st, 2025, you were given an additional $7,000 contribution room for 2025. Plus, because you took out $20,000 in 2024, you get that back the following calendar year. So come January 1st, 2025, in this scenario, you would have $27,000 of contribution room. So contribution room in the new year here now in 2025 is made up of any unused room from previous years, any withdrawal from last year, plus new contribution room from this year. And yes, it does get a little complicated, and that's why you have to continue to track it and pay attention, because over-contributing to your TFSA can be costly. What happens if I over-contribute to my tax-free savings account? Well, the penalty is quite steep. It's 1% on any over-contribution amount on a monthly basis. So it's a very punitive penalty. So make sure you understand your limits, how much you put in, and if you're not sure, play it conservative. Because over-contributing to your TFSA can be very expensive. We've seen penalties happen now. Early on, 2009 to about 2015, they weren't really heavy on mandating the penalty, but lately we've seen a lot of penalties come through. So make sure you're not over-contributing to your tax-free savings account. Can I hold investments in my TFSA? The answer is yes, and that goes back to my comment about the TFSA should be a tax-free investing account, not a savings account. Now, some of you have a short-term need, you have lots of contribution room, and sure, you can use your tax-free savings account as a savings account, put it in a GIC or a high-interest savings, and earn your couple percent. But where the power of the tax-free savings account really takes effect is investing that money. So for many of you, myself included, my tax-free savings account has very similar investments to my RRSP account. It's for long-term growth. I want capital appreciation. I want growth in that account because that growth is tax-free. So I don't want to earn just 1 or 2% in that account because the advantage of earning that tax-free is limited then. I don't want to take too much risk because I don't want to lose all that money because I'll lose that contribution room. So it's a fine line. I want to play within my risk tolerance and asset allocation mix, but I want to invest that money. So going to be invested in ETFs, in mutual funds, in stocks, in a number of investments. Essentially what you could invest your RRSP in would be the same as your TFSA. Make sure it's part of your comprehensive retirement plan and financial plan, but make sure your TFSA is actually working for you and you're taking advantage of the tax-free income. Can I withdraw money from my TFSA at any time? Yes, you can, and withdrawals, again, are absolutely tax-free. And this is why as you get into retirement, having a funded TFSA account is really important, because if you have an emergency or you just need more income without driving up your taxable income, a tax-free savings account can be a great tool to use for that resource. So again, you can take money out of your TFSA at any point, just understand the limits. Anything that you take out of your tax-free savings account in 2025, you'll get that contribution room back in 2026. So as an example, and this is a caution for all of you, let's say coming into 2025, you have maximized your TFSA. January 1st, you contribute an additional $7,000, new contribution room here for 2025. Moving through 2025, you need a bit of money and you pull money out, let's say $10,000 out of your tax-free savings account. You cannot put $10,000 back in until 2026. You've already maximized your TFSA. It's not a money in, money out account. So be careful with that. You can take money out any time, but if you've maximized the room, you don't get that back until the following calendar year. So if you've maximized your TFSA, let me say this again. If you take money out, don't put money back in until 2026, and you'll get that contribution room back, but not to the following calendar year. What happens to my TFSA if I move abroad? So if you move abroad or retire abroad and you have a tax-free savings account here in Canada, you can hold on to it. It's not something that you have to necessarily liquidate, but you won't be able to put new contributions into your tax-free savings account. Again, if you're moving abroad, you want to make sure you talk to a cross-border tax accountant. Moving abroad, there's a lot of tax nuances to it. Your TFSA is one of those. But in general, for most of you, as you move abroad, you can continue to hold your tax-free savings account here in Canada. It will be tax-free. You just can't make new contributions to the account while you're living abroad. Can I use my TFSA as an emergency fund? At the end of the day, yes, you can use your TFSA for whatever you want. Of course, if you use it for an emergency fund, that money should be invested in very safe, very liquid, very tangible assets, meaning that if you need the money tomorrow, you can get it without penalty. And that typically means you're investing in something that's not earning a lot of interest, which is fine for an emergency account, but it's not an ideal situation for your tax-free savings account. Ideally, you're utilizing your tax-free savings account for longer-term growth. Your emergency fund is more in a non-registered account that's earning 1 or 2%, and you're paying the tax on the growth, but it's not a lot of growth. Let your tax-free savings work. If you're in a situation where you're not maximizing your tax-free savings account anyway, you have an emergency account, yes, you might as well then use your tax-free savings account, because even at 1 or 2%, you're still saving taxes on that growth amount. So again, your tax-free savings account can absolutely be used for your emergency fund. So if you have no other use for that room, use it for your emergency fund. But as things progress and as you save up more money, you may want to shuffle your emergency fund out of your TFSA and utilize that TFSA contribution room for better growth opportunity to earn more money, potentially tax-free. What happens to my TFSA when I die? If you're married or common law, you want to make sure that you've listed a successor beneficiary on your TFSA account. What this does is it allows your spouse or common law partner to take over your account even if they don't have the contribution room. Now, rules in Quebec are a little bit different. I won't cover that in this video, but anywhere else in Canada, you want to make sure you've listed a successor beneficiary. So let's say you have Joe and Sally. Now they both maximize their TFSA account, so they don't have any contribution room left. But Joe passes away and he's got $150,000 in his TFSA. It's grown over time, and Sally also has $150,000. If Joe has named Sally as his successor beneficiary, Sally can take over Joe's account and essentially have $300,000 of TFSA. So a successor beneficiary, or successor holder as it can sometimes be called, has to be a spouse or common law partner. And if you are married or common law, make sure that you've listed this. So Wherever you hold your TFSA, make sure you've listed that successor holder or successor beneficiary on your account. If you're not married to common law, then you want to make sure you name a beneficiary. When you pass away, all the growth to the date that you pass away is absolutely tax-free. So if your account's growing to 150,000, that will be passed to the beneficiaries, whether directly or through your estate, on a tax-free basis. If your TFSA continues to grow after date of death, the growth after the date you've passed away would be taxable. So again, going back to if you are married to common law, make sure you've listed a successor holder or a successor beneficiary on your account. If you're not married to common law, you can name a beneficiary to make sure that that money is passed on to the person you want to be passed on to, and any growth to date of death is absolutely tax-free. Okay, so we've covered the RRSP meltdown strategy. We've talked about how to use your TFSA in retirement, but there's one big question we haven't tackled yet. What happens if the market crashes and your portfolio drops by 10, 20, or even 30%? I always tell my clients that I never want them to worry about not being able to withdraw money they need to go on that dream vacation or to hit any of their retirement goals, even during market downturns. And so that's why we implement a simple withdrawal strategy that helps mitigate market risk while also ensuring your cash flow needs are always covered. To help walk us through this, I'm bringing in one of the other members of our team. So let me introduce you to Brett Martinson, manager of our advisory team here. So Brett, thanks so much for joining us in this video. It's great to have you back on the channel. I know we've done a few videos in the past, but today we're talking about withdrawals for retirement. So my first question for you, and as you know, you guys prepare plans for our clients, is what are 2 to 3 ways people can prepare their investment portfolio for retirement? So maybe give a couple examples around it as well.
Sure. So 2 or 3 ways I would say that they can prepare. The accumulation or contributing to your investments is different than withdrawing or decumulation. So in terms of preparing for withdrawing and preparing retirement, the key is that you don't want the money that you need to withdraw in the next little bit to drop 10, 20, 30%. So the main key there is just the money that you feel you're going to need or a plan shows that you're going to need should be sitting in something basically not guaranteed to drop. So that would be cash, that would be a GIC, something in those kind of areas, so that $15,000, $30,000, $80,000 that you need to pull out of your various investments is not participating with the market going up or down. The other couple things they could do is ideally they're starting to plan for this about 3 to 5 years out. They may not be implementing anything at that point, but at least they're, for example, talking with their investment advisor. We could do a whole video on the investment advisor should be talking to them, but we'll leave that soapbox for a moment. And just whatever you can let your investment advisor know about in terms of, yeah, retirement's on the horizon. It's probably 7 years out, give or take. It's now 5 years out. Yeah, I think I'm going to pull the plug in 2 years. And then the final thing is when you are getting close to implementing, and I would say close to implementing being hopefully, ideally, a couple of years before retirement, is then, especially if you have all your investments in one fund, like, you know, a balanced ETF or whatever you want to call it, you'll probably want to think about separating those out so that the money that you're withdrawing isn't all wrapped in that one fund. Because when I sell that balanced ETF, I can't pick and choose if I'm selling the cash portion, the fixed income portion, the equity portion. I have to sell virtually a proportion of all of it. So those would be the certainly 3 things that they should be considering and thinking about to prepare themselves.
And some people call that the cash wedge, right? Like have a cash wedge, which is, and we've seen a million different terms for that, but we really harp that on our clients too. Like, here's your plan. Like, here's how much investment or cash you need out of each different income bucket. Now, make sure that your investments actually line up with that, right? And in a perfect kind of plan and implementation, a 10, 20, 30% drop in the market shouldn't actually affect you in retirement. You prepared for that. And for most of the people watching these videos, you're either in retirement or getting close to it. You're thinking about retirement. And the reality is people are going to face 2, 3, 7, maybe even 10 market corrections of 10, 20% or more through their retirement. So it's not if, it's when. And so it's, in my opinion, in your opinion, and we do this day in, day out, it's actually quite easy to avoid market corrections in the drawdown of retirement,
Yeah.
as long as you have a plan and as long as you actually implement it with your investments. Brett, would you have an example of maybe a client that we've worked on in the past where they were maybe in a bad position for retirement? So not necessarily like bad investments, but just bad structure heading
Mhm.
into retirement with regards to their investment portfolio.
Sure. I can think of, quite frankly, a number of clients, specifically more time frame than clients. But I'll get into clients in a second. But if we look at like the first 6 to 9 months of 2022, when the market went down and then pretty much stayed down, and then it was in 2023 it started to climb up, give or take, depending on what you're invested in. I know that around the office, we were getting a lot of people asking for plans. And the first thing they were saying was, where should I be taking my money from? I'm in retirement. I'm about to retire in 3 months and all my money is down. So that's an example of where their investments probably were not structured properly for withdrawals, because if it was structured properly, and I totally get where they're coming from, but if it was structured properly, you probably wouldn't be having that question, because you would have so much in cash in your non-registered, so much in TFSA, so much in RSP, if you're planning to withdraw from those accounts. And then they could be withdrawing from that cash. I tell clients, for example, we're talking 5 to 10% of the value or the net worth, or excuse me, the investment assets, whereas the other 90-ish% is still focused on medium to long-term growth. We're not throwing everything into bonds and GICs. It's just what's coming up in the near future. So in terms of time frame, that would be an example. And in terms of a client coming to us and doing a plan, it's pretty much similar. For example, they may have all their money in dividend investing. That's been something that's been talked about a lot. There's nothing wrong necessarily with dividend investing, of course, but if they're not prepared for the capital to go down, and I always use banks as an example, I can't think of the last time a Canadian bank went bankrupt. Not that they couldn't, but I can think of lots of times where the Canadian banks went down 10, 20, or 30%, not because they weren't profitable, but just because they were riding whatever was going on with the market at the time.
Yeah.
So certainly, yeah, structured in the fact that they were basically structured for growth. They were doing what they've done over the last 10 years. They were structured for growing, and they didn't slice off that small piece of the pie to be structured for withdrawals.
Yeah. And not that dividend stocks are a bad investment. In fact, they can be a really good investment, especially in retirement, because they're providing that consistent cash flow. But
Absolutely.
unless the dividends is giving you all the cash flow you need out of your portfolio, which typically it's not in retirement, you need to complement it with other things. But it's just a fluctuation. A lot of people do head into retirement with a large basket of equities, and they just haven't prepared fully for the cash flow. The other one we've seen, and this was one of the very first clients I remember we did many years ago on a plan, they had a lot, if not all of their money in private equity. And so they were looking to retire in the next 12 months, and all of their money, like, 7 figures, was locked in for 3, 5, 10 plus years.
Yeah.
And they kind of said, like, well, how do we retire? And I said, like, you're going to have to see if you can collapse some of those investments, that kind of stuff. So just be aware of like the type of investment you have. Are you locked into it for a period of time? And this is where I say, like, people always ask, like, when's the perfect time to do a retirement plan? And I say 5 to 10 years is kind of that sweet spot, because it gives you a bit of a runway.
Yeah.
And part of that runway, as you get closer to your retirement, like you said, Brett, is just to make sure that things are set up for day one of retirement. Whereas if we do a plan, and we do a lot of plans for people retiring tomorrow or early in retirement even. And it's like, okay, yeah, we'll show you how to plan and get stuff on track. But if you need cash flow next month and you haven't prepared for it, it might be a little more challenging, right? So that's why having a bit of a runway does definitely help.
Yeah, and just to touch on that point about like some people may think, well, 5, 10 years before retirement, that seems like a lot. We have to also remember that part of retirement is what you're doing leading up to retirement. So as you well know, we can identify, hey, maybe you actually want to slow down your RSP contributions, because you're getting to a point where it's going to be tough to get all this money out, and you are probably going to be taking out at a higher tax rate than you're putting in. or you're not using RSPs or spousal RSPs as effectively as you could be, or whatever combination of that might be. But the fact that we're suggesting 10 years before is not because that plan's going to be perfect for the next 10 years. It's to prepare you no differently than, saving for a house. You don't start saving for a house 6 months before you buy the house. Hopefully, you start a little bit before. So same idea.
Yeah. Well, nowadays you start 60 years before you buy it with
Well,
the
yeah,
house prices.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, there's one more key component to your retirement plan that we need to cover, and it's an important one. So let's just get right into it. So what's one aspect that everyone needs to have? And I mean this, you need to have this in your retirement plan. And if you don't, go back to your financial planner and force them to have it. And I've heard from people that, well, I asked my financial planner, they had no idea what I was talking about. So reach out to our office, talk to a financial planner that understands this. And it's the laddered income strategy. And the laddered income in retirement is really important because it shows you can spend more now and still be okay later. So there's the go-go phase. The go-go phase of retirement is from retirement up to about age 75. That's how we build it out, about age 75. Statistically, age 71, 73 is when things start to deteriorate. Retirement slows down, bodies start to slow down, less travel, that kind of stuff. So if we build it at 75, we're being conservative there. Then from 75 to 85 is the slow go stage, right? You're still traveling a little bit, but life's starting to slow down. You're not spending quite as much money, not doing quite as many things. And then from 85 onward is the no-go stage, right? You're not spending a lot of money. It's hard to spend money. It's hard to travel. You can't get travel insurance, all of that. So those are the three stages of retirement. Now, the go-go stage is the stage, obviously, that you want to go. You want to travel. You want to do stuff. You want to check off your bucket list. And it's the most expensive time of retirement. And it should be. And the whole idea is this. When I got into this business, one of my main primary goals for our clients around retirement planning is I don't want you to get into your 80s and 90s and have way more money than you thought and look back and say, if I knew I had this much money, I would have done things differently earlier. And that's where the laddered income comes in. It says, hey, Joe, you can actually spend $75,000 now, then 65 in slow go stage, and then 55 in no go stage. And 55 is more than you're going to need based on what we've looked at. And it allows you to spend more early with peace of mind that you're going to have enough later on. And so for most of you, you get a plan that says you get $65,000 for the rest of your life. Well, what happens if I spend 75? Well, the plan says 65, so don't spend more than that. So you go along spending 65,000, and then you hit the slow go stage, and you realize, well, I can't do as much anymore. So naturally, you spend less. Then you hit no-go phase, and you naturally spend less again. And what happens is you get to kind of in your 80s, and you have hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra. This extra money is just compounded on itself. A lot of it's sitting in your RSP, unfortunately, and you've created a situation where you haven't spent enough, the tax efficiency isn't there, and you haven't had a good plan. So that laddered income, again, a conservative laddered income strategy shows you, look, let's go spend more early, but you're going to be okay later. That's the whole point of the plan. And I don't want my clients to get into their 80s with more money than they thought they would have. Again, if you have lots of money and you're like, hey, look back and, hey, I did everything I wanted and whatever, I just had more money than I needed. Perfect. That's fine. But for most Canadians, we're barely able to retire, right? We're scrounging for every dollar. You want to take those dollars and enjoy them in retirement, right? You grind your whole career to save, 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 save. You get to retirement and then you hold it too close to your chest because you don't know what to do, how much to spend. Like, I don't want to get to my 80s and have nothing left. So you hold it too close to your chest and you get on with retirement and you realize that, wow, I actually do have enough and I should have spent it, but it's too late now. So you worked, grinded away your whole career. Then in the go-go phase of retirement, you did not go-go. I want all of my clients to go-go. Make sure you're sitting with a financial planner that understands these concepts, the structure, and how to build a proper retirement plan that includes this laddered income to the income strategy and cash flow strategy of the plan. I hope all of that information about how to build a rock-solid retirement plan wasn't too overwhelming. Before we wrap this video up, there are still a few key things I want to cover, starting with some common retirement traps. I've seen retirees fall into these traps over and over again, costing them thousands of dollars or worse, completely derailing their retirement years. So let's make sure all the effort you've put into getting to retirement doesn't go to waste by avoiding these common pitfalls. The first mistake I see all the time is retirees making decisions around their emotional side, not the financial side. Now, when it comes to retirement, I always say retirement's about 10% financial, 90% psychological. So making emotional decisions in retirement actually does make a bit of sense. The problem is those emotional decisions can cost you a lot of money. So when I say financial is only 10% of the pie, that's the first piece you need to go to, right? You got a piece of apple pie on the counter. That first piece, that's what you need to go to here. So figure out the financial side first and then start making emotional decisions from there. So when it comes to some key decisions, make sure you understand the financial piece. I'll pick on CPP, Canadian Pension Plan, as an example. We tell all our clients, I don't care when you take your Canadian pension plan, I want you to know the difference between taking it at different times. So let's say taking it at 65 versus 70. The financial data might show that, hey, at 70, it actually will make the most sense, and here's why, and here's the numbers to support that. But you might be emotionally set on taking it at 65. So again, we would run those numbers at 65, make sure you're still okay to retire, and then you can take your CPP at 65. Doesn't make any difference to me, but now you have a financial number and structure behind that emotional decision. So again, as you get ready for retirement and as you walk through retirement, make sure you're not just making an emotional decision before you've thought about the financial implication of that specific decision. The second big mistake people make all the time is assuming these really good investment returns will continue forever. Or maybe you're a pessimist and you think these negative returns will last forever. The important part in retirement is to not ride the high and low. When we have good markets, as I record this in November of 2024, we've had a good run. We've had a couple years of really strong markets. I talk to clients all the time and it's like, yeah, I'm up 15, 20% this year, maybe 30%. So it's been a really good market. Markets average out, meaning that if we have a really good year, we're probably gonna have a bad year coming up at some point. When that is, nobody knows. And every time someone thinks they know, they're completely wrong. They bail out of the markets and they've lost a lot of upside. Look at 3, ideally 5 to 10 year averages in your portfolio. Are they lining up with your retirement plan? And that's why when we build out retirement plans, we default to 5%. Again, we can build plans at any percent, but clients right now are saying, Adam, why are we doing 5%? Like I've made 15% the last year. Okay, well, let's look at your 5 or 10 year average. I bet it's not 15. And if it is, you might be in something very high risk, and you may want to de-risk that as you enter into retirement. But again, don't get too high on the really good markets and don't get low on the really bad markets. Look at your 5 to 10 year average, make sure that return lines up with your overall retirement plan, and then make sure whatever cash you need in retirement. So look at your retirement plan. I need $30,000 out of my RRIF for the next 10 years. Make sure that cash flow is ready to go. Because when the market drops, not if, when the market drops, you're going to have that cash flow ready to go, meaning you don't have to sell anything when the market drops. You can let it hit the bottom, come back up, and that's when you start clipping off more of your investment. So again, have some strategy around this, but don't get too emotional over the highs and lows. The third mistake, and a huge trap that many of you fall into, and I encourage a lot of you to do more homework around this, in what are you paying for your investments, for your investment advisor, to have someone kind of manage your portfolio. And I come across this all the time where people are paying 2 to 3% with $1 million, $2 million, like a lot of assets. Even if you have $150,000, $200,000, if you're paying over 2%, it's time to kind of have that conversation with your advisor to figure out, like, what am I getting for this? Is there value here anymore? I just talked to someone yesterday and they said, Adam, like, I'm at a large investment firm in Canada. I won't name them for lawsuit reasons, but I'm at a large investment firm here in Canada. My advisor, they look after the stock portfolio a little bit. They don't do any planning. I asked them to put a retirement plan together. They can't do that. So it's just strictly investment advice. And they told me I'm paying 0.5%, but I really don't know. They tell me I'm doing really good, but I can't decipher what the statement is. And this is where investment firms have done a really good job, is making statements very confusing. And our industry has come out with something called CRM2, which is more disclosure of fees to clients. The problem is it kind of was botched in that only half the fees actually have to be disclosed. So where I'm going with this is many of you, when I talk to you, you're saying, oh yeah, I'm paying 1%, or I'm paying 0.75%, or 1.25%. The reality is that's probably only half your fee. So your advisor is probably charging 1 or 1.2%, but then there's the product behind it. If you're mutual funds or ETFs, there's a cost to that. Many of you are paying your advisor 1% or a bit more, and you're sitting in mutual funds that are charging you 1 to 1.5%. And that's where that 2 to 3% fee comes out of. And this client in particular, she was told she was paying 0.5%. She sent her statements over within 5 minutes. I did a full breakdown for her and showed her, look, you're paying just over 2% of fees on your account. She had over $1 million, paying over 2%, and half her portfolio, just under half her portfolio, was sitting in mutual funds. Some was in stocks, no planning. She was overpaying. She was paying way, way, way too much. She was throwing away $10,000+ a year in fees that she shouldn't be paying for. There's better alternatives out there. I get it. It's not moving to DIY necessarily. Many of you, most of you, shouldn't move to DIY. That's a big mistake, and it's not covered in this video, but that's a mistake unto itself. But look at what you're actually paying. And if you're not sure, get a third-party approach to it, right? Again, part of our retirement planning services, we can look at your portfolio and figure out what you're paying, your overall returns, all of that. Again, I talked to someone else the other day. They're like, yeah, my advisor says I'm getting 11% per year on average. And when we looked at the portfolio, it was under 1%. Again, you might think, well, that's kind of the client's fault. Well, no, clients don't necessarily know this. This is the advisor's fault. That's what you're paying them for. So again, make sure you understand what you're paying. What are you getting for your payment? Are they providing investments and planning, or just the investment side? If you're only getting investments from your current planner, you shouldn't be paying more than about 1.2% all in for everything. The fourth mistake I see all the time is not preparing for longevity. Many of you say, Adam, I'm gonna die at 75, 80, everyone in my family's died, or I just feel like I'm gonna die. Well, that's not the data behind it. A 60-year-old middle-class person here in Canada is going to live into their mid to late 80s, statistically. Now, of course, if you have health issues, that may shorten your life expectancy, but I have a client turning 100 this month. So yes, not everyone wants to live to 100 or will live to 100, but it's possible. Don't plan your retirement to age 70, 75, 80. The likelihood is you will live beyond that. So sure, maybe do all the tax planning to then, but what happens if you continue to live beyond that? Do you have enough money? Maybe you can live off your CPP and old age security at that point, but maybe you can't. So again, don't shortchange yourself on longevity and how long you need to plan for in retirement. The fifth mistake that so many of you make is you listen to that financial expert. You know the one at work, your neighbor, someone close to you that you spend a lot of time with that really has no financial expertise at all, but they want to make sure that they share their opinion with you. And that opinion, many of you listen to, and it's costing you a lot of money. This is typically around CPP timing. It's around how to draw down in accounts. It's how to do tax planning. There's a lot of mistakes that we see on an ongoing basis. And I always ask people, like, where did you get this idea from? Or how did you come to this conclusion? And 99% of the time it's, oh, my uncle told me, my neighbor told me, my coworker told me. And these people have no financial acumen to them. They have never done this in their life. In fact, sometimes it's their financial advisor, unfortunately. Their financial advisor said, you know what, you want to do this. But that financial advisor has a year of experience. They have no CFP designation. They haven't really done the decumulation phase. And I always say, retirement is a different beast than building up assets. So the accumulation phase is different than the decumulation phase. And unfortunately, majority of advisors here in Canada and even worldwide don't really understand that decumulation phase. And again, that's what our team focuses on. So that's what we do day in, day out. And that's why I always say, if you're at that stage, your advisor may not be able to help you properly anymore. And that's okay. That's where our fee for service comes in. Get a plan with our team, bring it back to your advisor, have them implement it if you want. So make sure you understand who you're relying on, who you're listening to, because that person could be costing you a lot of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, lots of money. The sixth mistake many people make, and this is something I always tell people, one of the goals of when we create a plan is to make sure you don't make this mistake. And it's holding on to too much money for too long. And if you're watching this video in your 50s or 60s, you're probably thinking, that's my parents. Many of you, your parents didn't spend money through life. They held on. It's based on the generation they grew up with, what they went through in life, and they held money very close. They don't talk about money, but then when they get into their 80s and 90s, they have stockpiles of cash. And I'm not saying this is everyone, but this is a lot of people here in Canada, and they never enjoyed their money. So as you get into retirement, have a clear plan so that you're not hoarding money for later when you could be spending it now. And that's the whole concept behind the go, slow go, and no go phase of retirement. You want that laddered income. The reason for that is because you can spend more in your 60s and early 70s. Then health starts to go, you can't travel as much, you will spend less. And then 80s and 90s, if you make it there, you'll spend even less. So your retirement plan should reflect that. What I don't want for any of our viewers is for you to get into your late 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, and look back and say, if I knew I had this much money, I would have done things differently. Look, now's the time to do things differently. Get a plan, understand the plan, how much you can spend. Obviously, you want to make sure you have enough later on, but that's what a good, clear, conservative plan will do for you. It'll say, look, you can actually go spend all this money now and still be okay later in retirement. The seventh thing I see, not as often, but once in a while, and again, this isn't a trap, it definitely will set you back in retirement, is a divorce or relationship breakdown. And obviously, this isn't always controllable, but again, we've seen it happen again and again. And it's something you want to consider as you walk into retirement is how stable is your relationship? And do you need to plan for retirement as an individual and not as a couple? And we actually have this come in the office a lot. And that's why I bring it up in this video. I talk to a lot of people say, look, I'm married, but I don't know if we're going to be married long. It's not going well. I need to have kind of an individual plan because if I retire, I need to rely on myself and not on both of us. Now, I never like to plan that way, but if that's going to be reality, that's how you need to create your plan. So if things aren't going well as you're getting close to retirement, which again, statistically, a lot of people go through marriage transition in their 50s. It's typically when your kids exit the house, you're mortgage free, you're getting promoted at job. Like there's a bit of a life transition, midlife crisis for a lot of people. There's a lot going on. And so again, I always say, take a step back, work on your marriage, figure that out first. That's step one. But again, if you're someone that's getting into retirement or you're planning for retirement and you just, you know what, like the chances I'm single in retirement is quite high, you may want to create a plan that shows that to make sure you're going to be okay. The eighth and final tip I have for you is really important. It's around cash flow in retirement. So a lot of you worry about market downturns, as you should. You've been through many through your life and you will continue to be in retirement. Market downturns, fluctuation in the market, that's not going anywhere. That's always going to be there. So how do you weather that storm in retirement? Well, it's actually quite easy. You make sure that you, A, have a really good plan that shows you how much cash flow and from what accounts on an annual basis. So for example, you might have an RRSP, retirement, that will convert to a RRIF, a retirement income fund. And let's say your plan has you taking out $30,000 out of that RRIF every year for many years, say 15, 20 years. The goal here is to say, okay, for the next 2 or 3 years, I want that cash flow, the 30,000 times say 3 years, so 90,000 total, to be ready to come to me regardless of what the market's doing. I don't want to sell anything when the market's down. So maybe you're putting 90,000 of your total RRIF portfolio in a high interest savings. Maybe some of your investments are paying dividends. So maybe every year you're collecting 5,000 in dividends. So you only need 25,000 in kind of a cash deposit. Again, there's many ways to do this. We've done other videos on this, but make sure that you are cash flow ready. Some of what we've talked about so far in this video has focused on the financial side of retirement. But something I always tell my clients, retirement is 10% financial and 90% psychological. I had the chance to chat with Dr. Riley Moynes, the author of The 4 Phases of Retirement, an expert on the psychological side of retirement. And so I want to share some of his insights with you, diving deeper into the 4 phases framework, as well as addressing some common misconceptions about retirement and offer some practical steps you can take to live a fulfilling retirement.
With regards to the book, maybe describe the 4 phases from a high level. Obviously, we'll let everyone else go buy the book and I'll link that below and they can read through it themselves and watch a TED Talk and all that. But just describe kind of high level the 4 phases and how you got to those.
Yeah, big picture, the 4 phases. Phase 1 is what I call the retirement phase. That's kind of, well, just as it's described, it's like taking a vacation. It's a time when you don't have any kind of routine and you love the fact that there's no routine, just like when you're on holiday, you do what you want, when you want, and so on. Most retirees mistakenly believe that phase 1 represents the ideal retirement. And it is for a while. But most people, or many boomers, for example, are going to spend probably 1/3 of their lives in retirement, up to 30 years. And although the vacation phase for most people, for me, it lasted 2 years exactly, you can't build a meaningful retirement where it's all about you. And that's really what phase one is all about. At the end of that period of time, I and many others found actually that I missed a routine, although I enjoyed not having one for a little while. And I actually was bored. And it came as a shock to me that I had been described. That's what retirement was supposed to be all about. And I'm bored stiff. What's wrong with me? And then I moved into phase two. And phase two is where we suffer significant losses, 5 significant losses, all directly related to retirement. These are a combination of losses, including a sense of identity, because for many of us, we identify with the work we do. We lose some of the relationships that we established during our working or domestic career. We lose a sense of purpose because many of us feel that the things that we do are meaningful and purposeful. And when we step away, we lose that. And for some people, there's a loss of power because over a period of time, some folks take on some added responsibility, perhaps for budgeting or for personnel. And we don't see these things coming. They're all directly related to retirement. We lose them all at once. And it's kind of like bang, and it's traumatic for many, many people. Mm-hmm. And in phase two, it gets worse because in addition to the losses that are directly associated to retirement, there are the 3 Ds that are not directly related to retirement, but they come at a time of life that often overlaps with retirement. We suffer some physical decline. We suffer some mental decline. There is a 40% likelihood, says the world famous Mayo Clinic, that when we retire, 40% likelihood that we will demonstrate signs of clinical depression. And thirdly, there is the increase in divorce, astonishing increases in divorce, where people over 65, for them, the rate of divorce has tripled since 1990. And we know now that the highest rate of suicide in North America today is men over 75. So phase two is a very difficult time for a whole bunch of reasons. Fortunately, at some point, most of us say to ourselves or to a significant other, hey, I can't go on like this. I don't want to spend the rest of my life, quite likely 30 years, feeling like this.
Yeah,
that's a good sign in the sense that we start to move into the rehabilitation phase, if I can put it that way. It's phase 3, I call it trial and error. And in phase 3, what we're forced to do, what we have to do, is to look for ways that are things that we can get involved with that are going to make us want to get up in the morning again, to make contributions. We need to do that. And when I say trial and error, there's lots of failure during phase 3. And certainly I experienced a dozen failures. And over again, people have recounted those failures to me.
Riley, is that your pickleball game or what is that?
Well, that would be one example. For sure.
Or the golf game, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that would be another example.
Yeah.
Oh, I got involved with, I served on a condo board for a while until I got tired of being yelled at.
Exactly.
You can go on and on and on, but the point is that you have to keep trying, and we have to look for that thing or things that is going to or are going to make us want to get up in the morning again. And for those people who are lucky enough to reach phase 4, and I believe only about 60 to 65% of retirees ever get there, those are the people who are have the most meaningful period of their lives. They can't wait for the sun to rise in the morning. They have got a million things that they want to do, and they're involved. They're connected to other people. They're making all kinds of contributions, and they are just enjoying life to the fullest. In a nutshell, those are the 4 phases.
And that's a reinvention phase, you call it, the 4th phase. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And so Again, I'll let the viewers kind of grab your book. We'll link it below. Read through this because everyone, as you bump up to retirement, you're going to go through these phases and struggle with them. And so the book really walks you through that. But what are some of the misconceptions, common misconceptions about retirement that you address in the book and just that you've seen over the last X amount of years as you've kind of walked through this project with many, like you said, interviewed over 150 retirees and lived life with a lot of them as well?
Yeah. Well, I think Adam, that there are two key misconceptions about retirement, at least from the psychological perspective. Number one is that a belief that phase one represents the ideal retirement. That's what all of the advertising says, people cavorting along the beach and drinking wine at sunset, all of that kind of stuff. And it is an important part of it for a very short period of time. But people think that's what retirement should be like for 30 years, and it simply is not. The second misconception that I've discovered over the years is that people kind of believe that retirement is a time to kind of do some floating. It's kind of like you don't have to work at it. And that's absolutely wrong. You do have to work at it. You have to find other things that are going to be meaningful to you, that give you a sense of significance, that make you, as I say, want to get up in the morning again. You need to find those things, and there's some work involved. You have to be introspective. You have to ask yourself some pretty tough questions about why am I here? What's my purpose here? What's the big picture? Things like that we often don't think about unless we're provoked into doing so, which I try to do in my workshops.
Yeah.
So yes, there's some work involved, and I would say that those are the two biggest misconceptions that I've come across.
How is it important, and I stress this a lot on the channel, but how important is it, have you seen personally, to maintain kind of that social connection and engagement in the community and not kind of walk through this process alone?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say if there's one thing that distinguishes successful retirement from unsuccessful retirement, leaving aside the financial part of it, it is connections. It is the thing that describes or that characterizes phase 4 people more than any other element that I have ever seen is a willingness and a desire to provide service to others in one way or another. Maybe it's part-time work, maybe it's volunteer. It doesn't matter what it is, but people get great satisfaction out of providing service to others. And that is the distinguishing characteristic that I find between phase 4 people and phase 1 people, where it's all about us.
Yeah. Like you said, right? As we redo our website once in a while, it's always, retired couple, and it's always walking on the beach, having wine at night. Like it's that phase 1 and honeymoon vacation period, right? So
Yep.
And then I want to leave our viewers with kind of, first off, actionable items, and then secondly, some personal experience there. But what are some practical steps that retirees can take to help just prepare for fulfilling retirement and journey and process going forward? So those that are just kind of entering in and kind of getting ready for these 4 phases.
Yeah. Well, whether people are not yet retired or whether they are retired, there are things that need to be done, in my opinion. Number one is, and again, we try to encourage people to do some introspective thinking. Number one is you have to identify the things that you love to do and the things that you do really well. That's number one. And everyone has got those things, but we don't very often think about them unless we're pushed to do so. That's number one. I call that unique ability. Things that you love to do and that you do really well. Secondly, people have to review and think about some successes that they have experienced so far in their lives. Most people, if they try, could do 25 or 30 of these. But we ask in our workshops, just identify 5. Just 5 victories that you've achieved. Thirdly, we ask people to look for the connections between those two. And I am astounded over and over again, Adam, that people don't see those connections, but it makes sense that things that you love to do and do really well will lead to success.
Yeah.
And people often don't see that connection. And the last thing that we encourage people to do is to kind of think about how does all this come together? How does your strengths at things you love to do and your past successes combined with things that make you feel good about yourself? And if you can combine that group of issues, and you can think about those in advance of retirement, better still. But even if you are retired, you've still got to think about them. You can't just coast. And when people do that, that's when the magic happens. And that's when they see a path to phase 4.
Okay, I promise this is the last thing I want to discuss, but it's quite important. Let's talk about some retirement regrets. Having worked with many retirees into their 80s, 90s, I even have a client that's 100 now. I've heard countless stories of things they wish they'd done differently. And at the end of the day, I don't want you to experience that same regret in your later years. So let's dive into some of the biggest regrets I hear and how you can avoid them to ensure you are able to live your dream retirement. The number one regret we see is they have more than they expected later in life, meaning that they got to their 80s, their 90s, and their bucket of savings is still really big. They did not spend enough early. And a lot of people later in life say, if I knew I had this much money, I would have spent a lot more money earlier. And that really comes down to the laddered income approach in retirement. So when you hit retirement, you want your retirement plan to have a bit of a laddered income strategy. That means more money from about retirement to about age 75. From 75 to 85, scale it down a little bit. And from 85 onwards, scale it down a bit again. And again, that shows you, okay, we can spend this much money earlier and still be okay later in life. It really allows you to make sure you don't get to end of life with a lot of money in your RSP. Not only do you have more money that you can spend at that point, but potential tax bill to CRA. Now, a lot of you fire back and say, Adam, but if I spend money early, I need money later because I'm going to go into a care facility. Now, the reality is most of you won't go into a care facility. The second reality to it is most of you will be fully covered. Now, most care facilities, private or public, are based on how much income you have. And that's why drawing down the RSP, having lower taxable income, even if you have millions of dollars in a TFSA account, most care facilities will look at your income, CPP, OAS, but mainly your RRIF account. So if you're wiped that out by then you're in a great position. So make sure that you don't leave too much to the end because A, it's going to create maybe more money that you have to pay for the care facility. But secondly, don't have those regrets of not doing things early in retirement. Have a proper plan so that you go spend your money, enjoy your travel and good years and healthy years earlier in retirement. The second regret is working too long. Now, a lot of you love your job, you love what you do, the people around you, all of that. But a lot of you hold on to your job because you're fearful or you respect, or however you want to put it, your boss. You don't want to leave them. You don't want to leave them high and dry. We have clients like this. They're working into their late 60s, early 70s because my company hasn't found someone to replace me and I feel bad. The reality is most of those people 20 years later will look back and say, you know what? I wasted a lot of good, healthy years and I didn't enjoy them the way I should have. So if you're someone getting close to retirement, you've run your plan, you can afford to retire, worry about yourself. Take care of yourself because everyone else is taking care of themselves. Trust me. You need to look after yourself. So run the numbers with your planner. If you're on track and you're able to financially retire, don't let, my job hasn't been replaced or anything like that, hold you back from retiring. The third regret is not traveling more. And for any of you that know people in their late 60s and 70s and 80s, that can end quick. So you could be traveling this week and next week it'll be done. Medical issue, you can't travel, you can't get travel insurance. It can end unexpectedly. So when you have the health, when you're able to travel, make sure you take advantage of that. And some of you don't care about traveling, you don't want to travel, and that's totally fine. It might even be driving across Canada. Whatever it is that you have kind of on your bucket list, start checking off that bucket list as early and as quickly as possible. And again, that's the biggest regret a lot of our retirees have is, I pushed stuff off and now I can't do it. Like I had a medical issue come up, I can't get travel insurance or it's way too expensive. And it's just something I'm never going to be able to do. And that's really it. They will never, ever, ever be able to do that trip, that excursion, whatever it was they wanted to do. So make sure that you get those done earlier in retirement when you're able to. The fifth mistake is not picking up a new hobby in retirement. So as you work, you're busy at work, you have kind of that vocation, the fulfillment, and you hit retirement and you're not finding stuff to do. You're spending time with friends, whatever it is. We all have, things that take up our time, but a lot of people regret not picking up a new hobby or vocation. So as you enter into retirement, I've said this before, try and enter into something. So retire to something versus retiring from something. A lot of us will retire from our job. We don't know what we're going to other than, hey, I'm not going to work anymore. And amen to that, because a lot of you don't like going to work. But I encourage you all to retire to something. Have a new hobby, have a vocation, have a passion that you can retire to. And that could be a plethora of things. It could be a million options on this list. But you probably have some. We have a client right now that's retiring to like aqua swimming lesson stuff. And that's great. Like it could be anything, something passionate. So again, she's going to start doing that. It's not about the money. It's about, I'm doing something that I've always wanted to do. What's your thing? Retire to that. The fifth and final regret, and to me, this is probably the number one thing, and my wife and I talk about this daily, is not taking care of your health, taking care of your body, moving your body enough as you get older and walk through retirement. It's really important. You might have a physical job and you retire, and again, you don't have that hobby or anything, or maybe your hobby is non-movement, and you don't take care of your body. You're eating more, you're at home more, it's easier to eat, easier to snack, you're not moving as much, and health starts to take its toll. Remember, when you retire, statistically for most of you, you have 5 to 10 years, maybe up to 15 if you retire early, of like good healthy years left. And if you take care of yourself, you can extend that. Now, kind of God willing, because we don't know if we're gonna have a health issue, but look, the better you take care of your body, the better it will take care of you. Right? So let's take care of our bodies. Let's move. Let's have activities. Let's eat well. Let's be careful of what we put into our body. Get lots of sun. And this is one good thing about traveling. Typically it's somewhere warm. Get your vitamin D in. Stay healthy. We have a client that's 99 years old. And he always says the reason I've lived to this point, and he was able to do a lot of stuff right into his early 90s, is he took care of himself. He moved. He still moves every day. He still does physio, body movement, that kind of stuff with someone 3 days a week, which is amazing at the age of 99. So take care of your body, keep it moving, and watch what you put in your body, and don't regret it down the road. Well, that's a wrap. I hope you now have a solid understanding of the steps you need to take leading up to retirement, how to build a really strong retirement plan, and how to manage the mental and emotional challenges that come with this life's transition. Now, one thing that we touched on briefly but didn't dive deep into in this video is CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. We actually did a full deep dive on that in another video, so be sure to check that out. And if you're interested in learning more about our services and how we can help you create a retirement plan to hit your retirement goals, you can learn more at parallelwealth.com/planning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.